Hey, yo, I want to talk about Commander. It's a format that requires each player has a deck of exactly 100 cards, no more, no less, right? Right, so how could we possibly make a deck smaller? Well, let me introduce you to Super Impulse, a company that makes a brand of toy replicas named World's Smallest. Miniature versions of well-known toys like this functional Super Soaker, this playable game of Monopoly, this 1.25-inch tall Power Ranger action figure with 3 points of articulation. And this panic attack-inducing Malibu Barbie dream house. Look at it! It's like a monster from Doctor Who. But from 2020 to 2022, they released 3 sets of Magic the Gathering dual decks, which were reprints of the Jace vs Vraska decks of 2014, the Ajani vs Nicol Bolas decks from 2011, and the Heroes vs Monster decks from 2013. All of which are about 1/4 of the size of the original. Look at them, they're so cute! Now, you may be thinking, this will never work, these aren't real Magic cards, you couldn't take these to a tournament, they aren't legal. But if the back of the packaging for the 4-deck deluxe edition is to be believed, these decks are fully playable. Yes, it actually works. Good enough for me, I'm taking fully playable as gospel to mean that these cards are legal. And it should be said that I was letting this deck idea brew in the back of my brain for like a month before I sat down to write this script. And a few days before I started, I got this comment on an unrelated video of mine that just happened to mention the pre-existence of another tiny commander deck using these world's smallest dual decks. So apparently I'm not the first to think this up, which is frustrating because I thought I was so smart. But upon discovering my hubris, I've chosen to try and keep my creation here pure, meaning I have not looked up anyone else's deck list. There's only 6 decks worth of these miniature cards available, so there's a good chance that my deck list will have a lot of overlap with other people's, and quite likely mine won't be as good. But I can confidently say that I don't know for sure either way, because I haven't looked. This video is all me. And if you want to see my deck list in full, I'll link to it as a free post on my Patreon in the description below. While you're down there, please like and subscribe, and if you do check out the Patreon post, maybe check out the reward tiers I have on there too. I actually have a new one for £1 or about $1.50 I think, which gets your name credited on screen at the end of my videos. Your name won't be huge, but it will be there. The catch for that low cost, however, is that I'm limiting membership to only 1,000 people. So if you want to support me to keep making videos like this, you want to see your name credited on screen, and £1 or $1.50 doesn't break the bank, then come join me on the Moonbase via my Patreon. Shall we see the deck? Let's do it. And we're going to start with the ramp. Now, normally a Commander deck will run colourless artefacts like Mind Stone, Arcane Signet, and of course, Soul Ring, as these are Commander ramp staples. But these cards weren't printed in the dual decks, so we have to get more creative. Which means that we're going to be running Gatecreeper Vine, Sylvan Ranger, and Merfolk Wayfinder, who all help us look for land from our decks when they enter. In addition to Jessian Zombies, Sylvan Bounty, and Krosan Tusker, who all have some form of land cycling. Obviously, none of these are quite as good as a mana rock, and it's not so much ramp as it is guaranteeing a land each turn, but without alternatives, these will have to do in a pinch. Now, as for the lands that we'll be fetching up, we're running 9 basic forests, 9 basic swamps, and 10 basic islands, because while our options are limited, there's also nothing wrong with running a lot of basics. However, in addition, we also have a Golgari Guildgate, a Tainted Wood, and a Rupture Spire to give us sources of different colours of mana. And good news, because we have classics like Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse too. We're also going to run Rogue's Passage, as this will be a creature-dependent deck, and stopping one of our big boys from being blocked may prove useful during the game. And in a similar vein of thinking, we're also running Hallam Adepts, Llanowar Reborn, and Dread Statuary, as, like Rogue's Passage, they all bring their own utility which is situational, but worth having. For our next category, it's Card Draw, and we fare much better than we did with Ramp. We've got the pretty decent Night's Whisper, the recurable Deep Analysis, and the not terrible Jace's Ingenuity, which, as you can see, all let us draw multiple cards at once. We've also got Auron Viper, and Demir Cutpurse, 2 non-humans, that fact will be important later, who let us draw a card when they deal combat damage to a player. And we are running a copy of Future Sight, which is not really a draw spell, but it does let us play cards from the top of our library, which is a bit like having one more card in your hand, so I'm counting it. We've also got some non-human includes like Surveilling Sprite, a creature that lets us draw a card when it dies, Aeon Chronicler, a creature with Suspend that lets us draw a card every time we remove a time counter from it, and the all-time great Underworld Connections, Another enchantment which lets us pay 1 life to draw a card. Very good in any deck, nice to see it here. And while these next ones aren't really for card draw per se, I'm also including here cards that replace themselves, like Thought Scour, a 1-mana mill instant, Into the Royal, a bounce instant with kicker, and Remand, a bounce counter spell for 2. Like I say, none of these are really card draw, but more like cheap enough card filtering, but that'll do. Now, our next category is removal. And normally for this we'd want cards like Infernal Grasp, Naturalize or Pongify, but again, without those we have to make do. But cards like Beast Within, Tragic Slip, and Vapor Snag show that this deck isn't without some fangs. For some flexibility we're running cards like Profane Command, Spite and Malice, and Vraska the Unseen from the Jace vs Vraska deck. And because of that, while he doesn't make sense in this category, I am going to include Jace, Architect of Thought, because these two shouldn't be fighting. They're off raising their adopted child, so come on Loverboy, in you go, you guys should be together. We aren't done with threat responses though, because we are running some fun includes like Claustrophobia, Agoraphobia, and Recoil, just to mess with our opponent one way or another. And we have some smaller damage spells like Stab Wound, Last Kiss, and Consume Strength. Not massively powerful, but better than nothing, and I certainly wouldn't be sad to draw these. And finally we have some situational plays like Prey Upon, Griptide, and the damage prevention spell Terrifying Presence, all of which are good in the right scenario. I wouldn't want many more of these types of cards in the deck, but Terrifying Presence for instance can save you the game if played right. And up next is usually the category where I start talking about sweepers and board wipes like Cyclonic Rift or Wrath of God, but I'm going to be honest, we don't really have anything like that in these colours from these dual decks. So I'm just going to add Marsh Casualties here on its own because it's about as close as we get. It's not a terrible card, though admittedly it's not a great substitute for a board wipe. Our final category is our creatures, but before we get there I want to include 3 cards to help them out. Regrowth returns a card from our graveyard to our hand in case one dies, Treasure Find does the same thing, and Lead the Stampede lets us find some creatures from the top of our deck. As for the creatures themselves, first up we have cards like Kavu Predator, Weight of Precinct 6, and Polukranos World Eater. Creatures with the potential to get big, who could legitimately win us the game given the chance. Next up, Deadly Recluse, Death Hood Cobra, and Acidic Slime are all creatures with Death Touch, which will become very annoying if we compare it with Trample. Speaking of Trample, let's add Festerhide Boar, another potential big boy, Crowned Ceratok, another potential win condition, and Spawnrife, who's, well, he's not great actually, but he is very fun to play with. Then we have some utility creatures, like Briarhorn, who pumps a target creature for +3/+3, Stonefair Crocodile, who can gain lifelink in a pinch, and Reaper of the Wild, who also has Death Touch and lets us scry one whenever a creature dies. When Shriekmaw enters the battlefield, it lets us destroy a non-artifact, non-black creature. When Mold Shambler enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it lets us destroy a non-creature permanent. And when Oran Reef Recluse enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it lets us destroy a creature with flying. When Aether Figments enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, we get to add some counters to it, and it can't be blocked, which is nice. Vine Lasher Kudzu gets counters each time we lay a land. And when Gore Clan Savage enters the battlefield, it gets counters if an opponent was dealt damage this turn. Riverboa has Regenerate and the always hilarious Island Walk. I don't care if the designers say it isn't a fun mechanic, it is. Troll Aesthetic has Regenerate and the sometimes hilarious Hexproof. And Pulse Tracker is a 1/1 for 1 that makes each opponent lose life every time it attacks. 100% pure comedy gold. Speaking of 1-mana creatures, Chronomatron is a 1-mana 1/1 that can tap to add counters to itself. Jace's Phantasm is a 1-mana 1/1 that becomes a 5/5 if an opponent has 10 or more cards in their graveyard, very likely in Commander. And while Riftwing Cloudskate is 5 mana, it can be suspended for cheap, it's a flying 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you can bounce a permanent to its owner's hand, which gives it a lot of situational flexibility. And that's it! Not only is that the last of the creatures, but that's the last card making up the 99 cards in the deck. And saying that while we look them over here, you may have spotted something that we're missing. Where's the Commander? See, these 6 dual decks came with some legendary creatures. Polukranos, for instance, is in the 99 here, and he wasn't the only legendary creature from the decks, so I did have options to use something like that as one of the commanders. But, ask yourself, what's the funniest possible card that you could use as the commander for this deck? Not just in terms of ability, but in terms of appearance. Take a moment, have you got one in mind? Well, did you think of the not mini regular sized card Glob Calamity's Augur? because even though his card is regular sized, he's just a little frog? Did you think Sidesty, Brood Tyrant, and maybe all these little non-human creatures are meant to represent the brood? Did you think of the Indominus Rex Alpha, because his card will seem so big in comparison to the rest of the deck? Well, when I asked myself that same question, I realised there was only one answer. So, for the commander, I picked the oversized copy of Atrimi the Ever-playful, which came in each box of the 2020 Commander Precon Enhanced Evolution. Is an oversized magic card a real magic card? I'd say yes, as much as the rest of the deck anyway. Why is it the funniest pick? Well, yes, it's massive, but there's a lot of oversized cards, so why this one? See, Atrimi here has Mutate. It means when you play it, you have to play it on top of or beneath another one of your cards. Imagine what that's going to look like. Imagine your board state, all these tiny little creatures and then one gigantic one over the top. That might only be funny the first time you play it, but I think it would be worth it. Imagine if your opponent had this deck and you didn't know it, and then you saw this. And that's it. That's my take on the world's smallest commander deck. What do you guys think? Would you play this? Do you think this is funny? Would this be funny if you saw it happen in real life? If not Atrimi, who would you run as the commander instead? Let me know in the comments below. Again, I've put a link to the deck list on my Patreon below. It's a free post, so don't worry, but do check out the rest of my page if you want to support me. Oh, and I don't claim ownership over this deck list, so feel free to upload it or play with it or whatever you like. I am working on another commander deck idea already. I won't spoil it here, but I will say that I'm really proud of it, so if something like this happens again, I swear to God I'm going to be pissed. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone that supports me, like James Diamond, Eggboy the Particle that permeates all existence, and the rest of my patrons whose names are on screen now. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this video, me and my Patreon page, where you can get your name credited on screen too. Check it out in the link in the description below. Hit the like button, leave a comment, install an adblock, and most importantly subscribe and share this video with a friend. Hit the notification bell and do all those things the algorithm loves. If you agree or disagree with any of my points, or you want to see me do a video on another subject, let me know and I will see you next time. And recoil, just to mess with our opponent. Opponent?